Welcome, everybody. Moadim l'simcha. It's great to see you tonight. I'm Rabbi Daniel Hadar, if you don't know me, from the Sephardic congregation of Florida Temple Moses, the home of the Turkish and Greek Jewry here in Florida. So it's great to see you tonight. Tonight is part of really a three-part series. We're going to have tonight, we're going to have something on Sunday. So even though the flyer says this Wednesday and next Wednesday, there's a break in between that will cover some of the things that you may be interested in too. So I'm going to mention all three. We have tonight's class, we have a Sunday night, and then we have a Wednesday night. So on Sunday, we're going to do all the songs, all the special tunes, all the special customary elements of the Seder in terms of the songs and how we chant the Agadah and things of that nature. On next Wednesday, we're actually going to have a full Sephardic Seder live, meaning that we're going to go through all the customs and insights of the Seder itself. Once you're sitting down over there, once you're at the Seder, everything you're supposed to do, that will be next Wednesday. So Sunday is the songs. Next Wednesday is going to be the Seder itself. Tonight are neither of those things. Tonight, we're going to cover everything that comes before Passover. What do we do to get ready for Passover, for Pesach? What exactly is it that we need to do to clean, to purchase the right food items? What are the Sephardic customs? What are the laws? What are all the things that we need to know? Now, there's always a lot of questions that come with this. So tonight, I'm going to get to say, I'm going to begin by going through three different elements and then allowing time for questions so that we can really bring the discussion alive a bit. For the moment, I want to just give an overview of what we're going to talk about. So tonight, we're going to talk about the whole idea of cleaning for Passover, for Pesach, what the actual Jewish laws, what the Sephardic laws, Sephardic customs are with respect to that. We're going to go from there to determining and clarifying what is Hametz itself. We want to get rid of the Hametz on Passover and Pesach. What exactly is Hametz? What exactly are we worried about? How do we clean it? And how do we prepare our foods, and what foods can we have on Passover? And then we're going to talk about how to prepare our kitchens, everything that comes with that. After we discuss those three major issues, we're going to talk about selling the chametz, kitniot. Kitniot is a very loaded term. We know that Sephardic Jews eat kitniot. What kitniot are exactly, we'll go through that as well. Medicine, pet foods, natural foods, kosher lists, how to kosher all of your kitchen items and uses, whether it's an oven or whether it's a pot, etc. So we're going to go through all that tonight. We're going to go to pretty good pace. So if you have questions, what I'm going to do is the following. If it's something that has to do with the specific thing I just said, send a message on the chat. If it's a general question or something that you want to talk about, let's wait till the end and write those questions down. And then when we open it up for discussion, we'll share those questions, and that's going to be very useful as well, because you'll be able to perhaps share a question that other people are wondering but didn't have a chance to ask. Okay, so tonight let's begin with the core topic that we're going to be dealing with this week and next week, which is how do we clean our houses for Passover? What do we do to get ready for Pesach? And what are we getting rid of exactly when we start to look at getting ready to clean? So, a lot of people have anxiety or almost like a Pesach phobia about cleaning for Pesach. It seems overwhelming because we live in an age where we have, thank God, houses, cars. In Miami, people have boats over here, offices, multiple cars, and it gets scary. How am I going to clean all this for Pesach? And a lot of people just give up because they don't want to deal with it. But I'm here tonight to tell you that it's not that big of a deal. It's not that crazy. And if you understand what you're doing, it can be done relatively simply, and you can actually possibly even have fun with it. So let's begin. The number one thing that we have to clarify is, what is it that the Torah tells us is an issue? What is it that we're trying to do? And what is it that we're trying to clean? So the Torah talks about something called bi'ur chametz. Tashbitu seor mibatechem. That's what it says in the verse in Hebrew, which means get rid of the chametz from within your midst. Now, from a purely Torah perspective, if you nullify in your own head and you emotionally say, I don't want chametz in my life, chametz is meaningless to me, it's dust. From a purely Torah perspective, that would be good enough. So even though for this particular, there's another transgression we'll talk about in a minute, but for this particular transgression of not having chametz, as it were, if you in theory could say to yourself, everything is dust, everything's meaningless to me, and truly believe it in your heart and truly act that way, then even if you had things in your cabinets, even if you had entomins, a box of entomins, etc., it's meaningless to you. It's just dust. So you have, in essence, nullified. You have done bi'ur chametz in your heart, and you have taken care of what you need to take care of. Now, the problem with that, as we know, is that we're human beings. It's very hard to say that I emotionally divest from all of this food, which is clearly in my home because I wanted this food. I went out and purchased this food, or in today's world, I Instacarted the food here. So the Chachamim said, you're right. Possibly we can just simply nullify everything and be done with it. But practically, that's not the way we operate as human beings, because really we're going to be thinking about those entomins. We'll be thinking about whatever it is in our closet. I'll tell you, my kids just flew to LA for a Shever Brahot, and there's a great, amazing bakery in LA. And every time they go to LA, I say, please bring me back some of these danishes from there. So everybody loves danishes, so we bought a whole bunch back. Now, will we finish all of it before Pesach? Maybe, they're that good. But if we don't, and I leave it in the closet, it's going to be hard to say that's just dust, meaning we brought it all the way from LA. It's really good. So the Chachamim said there's a lot of things like that, a lot of things that we're going to want, or when we see it, we think about it, we're going to want it. So the Chachamim said you have to do bedikat chametz. Bedikat chametz is to search and get rid of the chametz, because we know that even though you maybe think that you can just nullify it in your head and say that it's all like dust, we know that's really, really hard to do. So since the Torah says don't have any chametz in your possession and don't eat chametz, we want to help you to make sure that you're not going to eat something that you find in your house, and that you truly get rid of it if it's not something that in your heart you feel you can get rid of. So the Chachamim instituted bedikat chametz. Bedikat chametz, I'm sure you've heard that terminology. It's usually used in reference to the search the night before Passover. The night before Pesach, we do bedikat chametz, we search for the chametz, but it generally means that we really go and we search and we get rid of all of our chametz, so that we really know that when we nullify it and we say that any chametz we might have, we really mean it, because most of our chametz is gone. Now, the term, as I mentioned, bedikat chametz, we usually use in reference to the night before Pesach. The interesting thing is that that's the way it was in the olden days. You see, our lives have become so complicated. It used to be they had much smaller dwellings. It used to be they didn't have all of the trappings that we have, as I mentioned, cars and offices and multiple vehicles, etc. So the night before, they'd start cleaning, and then they would search and make sure there's nothing there, and that would be it. In our world, that's not possible, because thank God we have so much and we have so many things. You know, in the olden days, and going back, many centuries, even having a library was a big deal. Today, everybody has libraries, and people study and people read, and crumbs fall in as they're eating their biscochos with their coffee in the morning in the book. So we have so many elements, so many places for food to hide, and so much access to food that it's close to impossible to do that. So when we talk about Bedikat Chametz, we understand it means that you start as early as you can to start to get rid of all the Chametz in your house. The night before, we do the official Bedikat Chametz, which means that we will double check and triple check and look at that night before to make sure we don't have any Chametz in our house. But certainly we start the Chametz now. Start searching for Chametz now. Now, that begs the question of what is it that we are looking to get rid of? What exactly is Chametz? Now, this is the key. So listen carefully to making your life so much easier on Pesach. The cleaning so much easier for Pesach. So let's go through what is exactly Chametz and what is Se'or. You see, the Torah talks about two things we got to get rid of. One is Chametz, and one is Se'or. The term that we're usually used to is Chametz. And what does that mean? So we know what that means is it's fermented, it's already fermented items of grain. So for example, it's when it's grain that ferments. So that is something that is used, and it is it had water, it was baked, or it was allowed to rise for 18 minutes. That's what Chametz is. But there's another category. And that other category is called Se'or. The Torah says, get rid of your Chametz, get rid of your Se'or. What is Se'or? Se'or is in essence yeast, or it's an actual element of highly fermented dough that can ferment other dough. So, for example, in different countries and different times, they would not have the access that we do today to yeast or what have you. They would use other elements of dough and put it inside of another element, and that would help it rise, as it were. So the Torah says, get rid of Chametz and get rid of Se'or. Now, these are very interesting terms. Chametz is one of the 5 grains that has fermented. However, of those 5 grains that have fermented, it has to be something that's really edible. And this is the key. You see, a lot of people go crazy because they think if there's any little bit of a speck of dirt anywhere in the house, it means that I didn't clean for Passover, I didn't clean for, and there's Chametz in my house. But you see, Chametz means something that is edible and is still edible, which doesn't mean something that a baby would eat. So for example, we have a little baby, and our baby will eat anything that it finds. So it doesn't mean something that a baby would eat, it means something that you would potentially eat. So for example, if let's say you're having a piece of cake and a few crumbs drop off the cake, and you're like, wow, I love that cake, and you put your finger down on the plate to put those crumbs in your mouth, that's edible Chametz. But if it's something that fell on the floor, that got trampled on, that got dirty, that got kicked around, that's not Chametz because it's unedible anymore. That's really garbage. That would come into the category of garbage. You see, that's a little bit different than Se'or. In the category of Se'or, that's the category where it could possibly ferment something. So you may have something that's questionable whether it can ferment something or not. But in terms of Chametz itself, it's got to be something which is actually edible. Now, this is a very interesting question. And it's a very interesting question that came up to the great Ashkenazic rabbi of America for many, many years, was Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. So Rabbi Moshe Feinstein did something very interesting. You see, imagine deodorant, right? Because you may think deodorant's unedible. So what about deodorant? Does that have to be kosher for Passover? What about other elements like that? So he had a very interesting ruling. And his ruling was that if something can be distilled, if something that has alcohol inside of it that could theoretically be distilled and consumed, then that is still considered chametz. Now, this was a very interesting response that he gave. You see, you may think that's crazy. That's not chametz. You told me chametz is something from the 5 grains that is edible. That's not edible. But the interesting thing is that it was, or it is, because his take on it is that you do have situations where people are crazy enough to distill. And in distilling, sometimes you have alcoholics like this, unfortunately, people that are addicted to whatever substance it is. They are, I'm sorry, admitting some people to the room. They are willing to do whatever it is to get whatever it is that they need. So under his ruling, this would be a problem, but this ruling only considered in effect alcoholic elements. It didn't take into account anything that's not alcohol. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have something let's say you have beer shampoo. Some of my guys here, they love beer. So if they have beer shampoo, would beer shampoo be chametz you have to get rid of in your house? So the answer is no, because you see there's no alcohol in there, it cannot be distilled. So that beer flavor, taste, whatever it is not something which is edible. So it's not considered chametz. And this is a very, very important ruling. Anything that is an element like that cannot be distilled alcohol, even according to that opinion, would not be considered chametz. So let's review for a moment before we take the next steps. On Pesach, we have a Torah prohibition to have chametz in our environs and to eat chametz. We said possibly emotionally you could say that's all dust, but that's really hard. So the Hamim said you got to get rid of it. So how do we get rid of it? Well, we got to start taking stuff out. What do we take out? Well, we got to take out the chametz and the seor. What's chametz? So we mentioned chametz are of the 5 grains that have fermented, but not just anything in the 5 grains, something that's edible. And according to this interesting ruling, something that's edible that can be possibly even distilled. But anything else, you don't have to get rid of. Now, what does this mean practically? What this means practically is that if there are things behind your couch or things that are, little particles here and there, those aren't chametz. That's really garbage. It has to be something that's edible and is at a certain size that you would actually eat it. Does it mean that no element on the planet can eat it? Well, a baby might put it in its mouth, but it's not considered food. Now, this changes the game because now you're really looking for edible products in your home. And when you clean for edible products in your home, it's not so crazy because those have to be somewhat sizable. So that makes the cleaning process much easier. Now, we worried about seor. We had mentioned that's another category. But for that as well, it has to be something that is of a nature that might help something rise, which is not everything. It's got to be something that is not already used to the degree that it can't do anymore. So this kind of changes our game with respect to the viewpoint, because now when you come to the 14th of Nisan, when you come to a point where you say, okay, I got to clean for chametz, you start getting rid of the most basic things. You start cleaning the most basic kind of cleaning, a good cleaning, but a basic cleaning, not one that has you, as some people do, with a needle on the floor trying to scrape in between the tiles in a way that you might find some garbage there that think it's chametz, because that's not chametz, and it wouldn't be seor in this case. It also would not include anything for sure that doesn't have some alcohol in it, or that is a physical element, let's say stick deodorant or what have you. There's no way to distill that, so we don't worry about that. Only even in an extreme opinion where it's something that can be distilled, that has to be something that has alcohol in it and that's liquid. Now we'll get into that a little bit more in a few moments, but that's a key element. Now, as a quick side note and an important one, On the night of the 14th, the night before Pesach, we check for the chametz and double check. Now this year, it's a very different year because Pesach falls out on Saturday night. And there are a bunch of different things about that, which we'll talk about later tonight or at one of the next classes. But what this means is that Erev Pesach, the night before Passover, is actually Friday night. Now, we're not going to clean up Friday night, Shabbat. So the cleaning this year, the Bedikat Chametz, meaning the final clean, has to happen on the Thursday night. So even though you're doing it 2 nights before, and even though you'll be able to eat bread throughout Friday and Friday night and Shabbat day, and we'll talk about that at the end, how we're going to maneuver that, we still do the Bedikat Chametz on Thursday night. So this year, it's on Thursday night. And I want to mention something else very interesting. It's mentioned to do the search at night. Why? You may think to yourself, why would I search at night? That's crazy. During the day, the light's out. I can see much better. Why would I do my search at night? Now, you may think to yourself, well, because in today's world, anyways, we have lights. But this wasn't for today's world. This was mentioned, centuries and centuries ago. But even in today's world, the light that you have in your home, no matter how good it is not nearly as good as daylight. In fact, for many other halachic matters, when we have to check things, it has to be done with a daylight or light that replicates daylight. So why would we tell you in searching for chametz that you've got to check specifically for at night when it's even harder to look? By the way, I look sometimes that way because we have some people here in the crowd as well. Now, this seems counterintuitive, but it's a brilliant insight. A couple years back, I lost my glasses on Erev Yom Kippur. It was a fascinating story, and I didn't have my glasses the whole Yom Kippur, and I had to lead a community of 600-700 people coming to the synagogue without being able to fully see. But one of the lessons I learned from that was that right before Yom Kippur, when I had my glasses, I tried to look for my special Yom Kippur shoes and my special corbata, my special white tie, and I couldn't find it. Something amazing happened. After the glasses disappeared, when I came to my closet to look for these things, I found them right away. And it dawned on me, it's the same thing as Bedikat Chametz, searching for the Chametz. You see, when all the light is on, when everything is so illuminated, it's hard to focus on a particular element to search for. Because we have so many things that our mind subconsciously runs to. You may have bills that you see. You may have pictures that all of a sudden remind you of a beautiful memory. You may have something else that says, reminds you about errands or whatever it is. So when all the lights are on, when I had my glasses and I was able to see the whole space, my mind was in so many directions, I couldn't focus on what I was looking for. You see, when you search for the chametz at night, at the Bedikat Chametz, the night before Passover this year, 2 nights before, when you do it at night, you're doing it in a very focused and specific way. And we say that you should use a light, whether that's a candle or a flashlight. I recommend a flashlight, frankly, because the candles people get so nervous about. And when I was a kid, in fact, I tried to search under my bed for chametz, and I lit the bed on fire. That's a fun story. I'll tell you about that some other time. But sometimes we're worried about the fire that we're not focusing on searching for chametz. So use a flashlight. But in any event, when you use a flashlight and you dim the lights, you don't have to turn everything off so it's absolute darkness. But we dim the lights. It allows us to focus in ways that if all the lights are on, we wouldn't focus because our minds would be everywhere. So as a quick sidebar, yes, we search at night when it's darker. Yes, we search with the lights dimmed because it allows us for greater focus. That's a quick side insight. Anyways, so to come back to the main topic, we are searching for chametz, edible foods. We're possibly searching for things that have alcohol in them that could be distilled like liquids. We'll talk more about that shortly. And we understand what the Chachamim said, which the Chachamim explained to us. We got to get rid of it because if it's there, we can't really nullify in our hearts. It's very hard for us to do that. Now, why is this so important? Now, this is so important because the Torah tells us that if you eat, besides owning chametz is a problem, and seeing chametz, having it with you, even if you were able to nullify it in your heart, there's still another problem. And that is that if a teeny bit of chametz gets into your food, you didn't you overrode and violated the big mitzvah of not having chametz on Passover. Meaning, during the year, let's say you have a nice big pot of chicken soup, right? Or a kibbeh hamba, as we have in the Sephardic community. And there's meat in there, there's chicken in there, whatever it is, right? And what happens is, or even a great chamin and Shabbat. And for some reason, you have a little kid who's drinking some milk, and a teeny bit of milk falls into that chamin, or falls into that pot. Normally, we would say something very interesting. We would say that it is mevatel, which means it is nullified with the mass amount of other food in there. It's nullified, so we don't worry about that, and the food is still kosher. It's not a problem of mixing meat and milk. But on Pesach itself, if some chametz falls in, you can't nullify it. You can't. So we're really worried about that. But so even if you were able to nullify everything in your heart, if one of the kids takes out a Cheerio and you're like, well, that's not Cheerios, that's dust. But if the Cheerio falls into your big stew, it's a problem. If you eat that, it means you're eating chametz on Pesach. So that's why we're so careful with this stuff. Now, somebody asked a question here. An interesting question about pasta that's uncooked. I'll get to there because that's a little bit of a different topic. I'll get to that in a minute. So what the upshot of all this is that when we're getting rid of the chametz, we got to make sure that it's gone in every capacity so that we don't have this issue. And chametz is a very big thing. Chametz, and I'll explain this conceptually in a minute, but it is in essence, the physical manifestation of a problem that we had as a Jewish nation in Egypt. It really is, everything in this world has a physical manifestation of a spiritual reality. So you might think to yourself, what's the big deal? It's just a breadcrumb. What's the big deal? Just a couple of Cheerios. Why is that such a big deal? Well, the Torah tells us it's a big deal. There's many elements that we can't fully comprehend how they impact our soul and how they completely impact the nation of Israel, as it were. But chametz is one of them. And chametz is considered something that really cuts to the heart of who we are as Jews, because when we left Egypt, we left b'chipazon in a great hurry, and we only had matzah. We were only able to take that with us. And it wasn't random. It was because that's all we were able to do as a nation. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit more in a different class, but I just wanted to kind of give that quick theological concept so you understand that there's a lot of depth, a lot of spirituality to this chametz, and therefore we take it very seriously. And the Jewish people have always taken it very seriously. Whether it was in Turkey or Greece or Poland or anywhere, it's been a very, very important thing. And to some degree, it's very interesting, but to some degree, it's like Achad Ha'am says with respect to Shabbat, less of the Shabbat that the Jewish people kept Shabbat, the Shabbat has kept the Jewish people. Less that we're keeping Passover than Passover is really keeping us on many levels that we don't fully comprehend. Now, with that said, because we got to get rid of all the chametz, this takes us to the next story. You see, the first thing that we talked about was the food elements, but now we have all the cooking elements. You see, inside of the cooking elements, we got a problem. And the problem is that we have, whenever you cook something, we understand that those food elements go into, in a very real way, into the pots that we're using, into the utensils that we're using, into the pans that we're using, into the ovens that we use. So how do you get chametz out of there? Because I just told you, if you remember, that chametz is something which is so serious to us that it's a big prohibition. So how do you deal with that? So what we do is we do something called koshering. We kosher our pots and pans and utensils for Passover. Now, how do we do that? And right after this, I'm going to get into a lot of Sephardic elements here, into how we actually clean. This is different than the Ashkenazic ones. But in general, let me just give you the quick overview. The way that it works is that however we, in the laws of kashrut, of kosher, we understand that however an element got into a pot is the way it gets out of a pot. So for example, if you're cooking pasta, the way that the pasta or elements of it get into the walls of the pot is through hot water because it was boiled, versus a grill, my barbecue grill, where you grill up something on there, it's burned in, it's seared in. So for the pot, we understand the way that it gets out is the way that it got in. So there's a general idea of something called hagala, and there's another general idea of something called libun. Hagala means that something got into, was cooked with hot water, was boiled in, and the way that you get it out is you boil it out. Libun is that something got in through fire, so you got to fire it out. So what does this mean? Well, this means that on a general level, all of your pots and all of your cooking utensils that are generally used for cooking usually are done in a pot or with some sort of a stew or with some sort of a water-based element. So the way that we clean that out is that we go ahead and we allow that to go into hot boiling water, and that hot boiling water will in essence pull out whatever was in there. If it is something that is burned, so for example, your oven, it has to be reburned. So let me give you some specific examples. What we do is we let's say take a large pot and we will boil it. And in some communities, they will boil a massive pot that will allow people to bring all of their pots and pans into the actual massive boiling water. You stick them in there just for a few seconds and you pull it out. And that will kosher your pots and utensils if that was the way that they were used originally. Now, what if your community doesn't have this big boiling vat? Or what if you don't have time to go there? What do? Well, what we do is we take the biggest pot that we have in our home. And first we make that kosher. The truth is you could do it even without koshering it, but I like to tell people just kosher that originally. So how do you do it? Because you're not able to dip that into something else. What you do is you boil water and you put like a stone in there that will push whatever water you're boiling over the sides. So the inside is boiled and the outside is going to be immediately boiled when the water boils over there. Once that is done, that pot is kosher for Passover. Now that pot, which is your big pot, can be used to then put other utensils in, and you just put them in for a few seconds. Now, when you put them in, one thing to note is that if you put a lot of things in it, it cools down the water. So you may have to wait till it reboils if you see that it's not boiling anymore. But overall, we'll talk about specific stuff in a minute. Overall, that's the way you kosher a pot or some basic utensils. The way you kosher a barbecue grill or an oven or something that really was burnt through is that you go ahead and you burn that back either with a blowtorch, which believe it or not people do, or inside of a self-cleaning oven. Now, let me say for both of these items, the way that we start this process is that you got to make sure that your pots, pans, utensils, grill, etc., is really scrubbed down well and not used for at least 24 hours before you kosher them. But once you can do that, and once you really burn it through, once you really clean it through, so you feel very confident it's very clean and not using 24 hours, then you can go ahead and do these koshering methods, whether it's the boiling or whether it's the burning. Now, again, I'm going to go through specifics in just a moment, but that's an overall viewpoint. I want to go through a few other overall viewpoints, and then we'll go through the specifics. We also have an option to sell our chametz. We're going to send out also a link that you could sell it directly through our website that you could we'll sell it on your behalf. So you may ask yourself, okay, I'm going to clean everything up. I'm going to get my pots and pans ready. I'm going to get everything going. But I have so much stuff. I can't get rid of everything. What should I do? Well, you have an option, and you have an option to sell it. Now, what does it mean to sell it? Well, it's actually a complicated contract that the rabbis do on Erev Pesach, on the day before Pesach, which this year is going to be again 2 days before, where we have a non-Jewish individual actually purchase the items from you, and you even tell them where they can get those items. Now, it's a real sale, it's a real contract, but practically they're probably not going to come and get those items. And then they resell it back to you after the holidays, so you can reuse them. But that is not necessarily what we do for everything. What do I mean by that? Like theoretically, you could sell everything, just sell everything. But it's the custom, kind of a universal custom, to get rid of as much actual bread products you have, as much absolute grain products. See, there's a lot of products that have some grain in them, but we try our best to get rid of as much as we can. It's part of the whole cleansing element of Passover and what have you. And if it is, if you have a lot of items, or for example, let's say you have a lot of whiskeys or scotch or what have you, that's too valuable, you certainly can sell it. And when you sell it, you cordon off those sections and you try to cover it so that you don't get confused to what's kosher Passover, what's not kosher Passover. So that is an option. So selling the chametz is an option, but that doesn't preclude from cleaning, because there's a lot of places in your home that you're not selling. And when we sell, we actually will sell, let's say, that closet along with the food items, so it's all gone over there. But at the same time, it is universally accepted to try to get rid of as much as we can. Now, this takes us to the next question, which is kitniyot. What are kitniyot? Now, I'm going to give you a list. Now, let me explain to you what this is. This is a big and important word if you are a Sephardic Jew. A very important word. This is your favorite word. If it wasn't your favorite word before tonight, this is your favorite word. So we can all say it together. Kitniyot. Now, what is it exactly? Well, there are elements. For example, corn is a perfect example. There are elements that are used for flour, meaning they're not grain-based flour, but they can be ground up and used as a mix, as it were. Beans, corn, legumes, many things like that. And many communities were of the opinion in the Ashkenazic world that since this is so similar to chametz, and or in the marketplaces, it was sold in the same way or in similar ways that they would be confused or it would just be mixed in, that they cut out all kitniyot, and they don't eat that on Passover. Now, Sephardic Jews never did that, which opens an entire huge world of products. Now, let me be clear on a couple things. Number one, everybody always asks me, can I eat rice on Pesach? Because rice would come under kitniyot. Rice is not one of the grains. It's not chametz. Can I eat rice on Pesach? Now, in all Sephardic communities that I'm aware of, most of them, they do eat rice on Pesach. In fact, it's a big staple of their diet. But let me be clear. In the Turkish community, we don't eat rice on Pesach. Okay? Now, why is that? Well, historically, because they were concerned that there was some chametz mixed in, because they were so used to it. I'll mention the Greek. Somebody just asked me about the Greek. I'll mention that in a moment. They were so used to it. It felt like chametz to many. Now, let me tell you something very interesting. The greatest Turkish rabbi of the last 200 years was a great chacham by the name of Rabbi Chacham Palaji. And Rabbi Palaji had something very, very interesting. He writes in a tshuva, in a response that I read. He said, if I had the power, I would tell everyone in Turkey to eat rice on Pesach. But he said, nobody listens to me. Nobody listens to me. They don't want to eat rice. And amazingly, the communities, whether it's in Seattle or whether it's here in Miami, and all the groups in Cuba that went from Turkey to Cuba to Miami, and even many of the Turkish groups around the world and Turkey itself, are adamant about not eating rice. So even though Rabbi Palaji said it's not a problem, but he said, I can't change their mind. And I'm here to tell you, as a rabbi of the Turkish community myself, of this heritage, that I am not going to attempt to change people's minds on this, even though there in today's world, there isn't a halachic imperative. Of course, you got to check it and all that, but there isn't a halachic issue per se. If it's checked, and obviously it's not mixed with grains, the wheat, etc. But it's something very interesting. There are some things that have kept our community, and it keeps people's mind on Pesach and taking Pesach seriously. And for our community, that seems to be an important one. So we are not going to eat rice on Pesach here. Now, someone asked me about the Greek community. I did not see a directive specifically within the Greek Chachamim Shuvot with respect to that. In today's world, we live in Disneyland. What do I mean by that? I could say, hey, I am Turkish, and I actually, for my daughter's wedding, we just bought, the special Turkish fez, and we could have both biscochos and bolemas, and we can have anything we want, right? Which is great. But so I can kind of recreate Turkey and buy the CDs and have the books and everything as though I'm in Turkey. In the old days, really, they would cross over. It was all part of one Ottoman Empire. So, and there were many different elements of the empire, if you will. So I am sure that some elements of the Greek community didn't eat rice, and I'm sure that many did eat rice. So I would say that if you don't have a set minhag tradition in your family or community, I would say that based on this tshuva, this response from Chaim Pelagi, and based on the rest of the Sephardic world, and based on halachic imperatives, you could eat rice, but you have to be careful, make sure that it is checked properly, so it's not part of a mix. Now, with that said, rice is just one thing, right? You see in the Syrian community, the Moroccan community, they eat rice every night, so it's a big deal. In our community, to some degree, yes, and not as much as them. So to us, there's a bigger deal, which is all the rest of the kitniyot, and I'm going to list them for you in just a few moments. But there's a lot of kitniyot, a lot that would allow us that as Sephardic Jews we can eat and we can really enjoy. And this plays out in many, many different ways. You see, in the Ashkenazi community, there are many issues of corn syrup and many other kitniyot issues. And many things in America will say that they're not kosher for Passover, not because of chametz, but really because of kitniyot. Now in Israel, this has changed. In Israel, they label things, and they'll actually label it. It will say, this is kosher for those people that eat kitniyot, and this is kosher for people, and this is not kosher if you don't eat kitniyot. So in Israel, over the last 10 years, it's really changed, where you can go into the market there, and there's a whole world of products. Somebody brought me some products, and their mind was blown, because on one side of the package, they weren't so well versed in this, and it says not kosher for Passover, and then they flip the package, it says kosher for Passover. So is it kosher? It's not kosher. What do you mean? I don't understand, right? So I said to them, well, that's just the Israelis playing with you. They just want to play with you a little bit. But no, I'm just joking. Actually, if you read it a little bit more carefully, on one side is the kosher symbol from the Ashkenazic Beit Din, because that's talking about the kitniyot. And on the other side is from the Sephardic Beit Din, the Sephardic kosher judge group, which says it is kosher because for those elements, they're okay for the Sephardic Jews and not okay for the Ashkenazi Jews. Now, before I go further, a question was posed over here. My parents were for Izmir, and we did eat rice. Any explanation? Well, what I can tell you something interesting, because Chaim Pelagi was there actually in Izmir. What I can tell you is it's possible, Izmir had many, many kehilot. It's possible on a few different levels. One level is that in a particular kehillah, particular synagogue. Look, I'm in Miami, I'll leave to Israel, and in 100 years from now, somebody says, what did you do in Miami? Well, the truth is we have so many different congregations here, and in this one this, and in that one that, etc. Right? Even in Seattle today, you have the Greek synagogue and you have the Turkish synagogue, and they have different traditions on many little things here and there. So it's possible that one particular community they came from didn't, or did eat rice. It's possible that they kind of moved on from there, and they saw other communities have rice, and then they ate rice too. So unclear, I don't know all the background to answer that, but this is very much in the realm of a minhag, which means of a tradition. And it's very possible that either they picked that up later, or it was for some reason in their particular grouping over there that made some sense. But my friends, and this is the thing I want to tell you, rice is always a hot topic, right? Even if it's cold, rice is still a hot topic. But the thing that you should know is kitniyot is vast. So as I mentioned, in Israel, they label everything. Now in America, with so many products coming from Israel around the world, you'll find this in products here as well. But on the whole, it's a different animal. And let me explain to you why. Theoretically, a lot of the sodas, you can buy kosher for Passover Coke. Actually, it depends what part of the country you're in. We have people from different parts of the country. Some have kosher for Pesach Pepsi. Some have kosher for Passover RC Cola, whatever it is. I used to, separate from being a rabbi, I'm also an attorney, and I used to work at a firm, and I had I always knew when Pesach was coming, I started to get ready for Pesach, not because of the Jewish calendar, not because it was Rosh Chodesh, not because I started to plan my seder, but because I had a non-Jewish secretary in the office who loved kosher for Passover Coke. Why? Because they substitute corn syrup for sugar. I'm sorry, they use sugar instead of corn syrup. And she loved this. So I knew I started to get ready for Pesach when she'd tell me, the Coke is in the store, right? Now, that entire concept is really, well, somebody's saying, so there's no high fructose corn syrup. Well, I'm going to get to that in a minute. The ingredients that are labeled in a lot of products, actually, let me just finish the story. Some of these elements have to do with kitniyot, but the OU, which oversees a lot of the production or a lot of the kosher certification for a lot of these products, dealt with it as though kitniyot are a problem, whether it's a soda or whether it's something else. In fact, that's why sometimes you'll see things that seem crazy. And for example, they'll have a kosher for Pesach symbol on tinfoil. You say to yourself, I'm not eating the tinfoil. I mean, I may get that hungry on Pesach. You may want to eat tinfoil. Maybe the matzah is that bad that you're like, I'd rather eat tinfoil. But that's actually not what it is. What it is, and paper towels too. It's because there's some cornstarch that was on there to seal the tinfoil, or was to give it some sort of a base. So because of that, it was labeled as a problem. So they needed to have a kosher for Pesach symbol. But that is not really a Sephardic issue. It's become a Sephardic issue because we're living in America where most of the kosher certification companies, or the biggest ones really, are part of the OU and Ashkenazi run. But again, that's changing a lot. But this changes the ball game in a lot of different ways. Now, let me walk you through some of the specific ways. I'm going to check on there because I'm going to pull up right now. I want to pull up the list that I want to read for you guys over here of what is kitniyot not, so you understand how vast this is and how many products it could impact. Okay, hold on. I'm just going to pull up the list here very quickly. And again, these are things that as Sephardic Jews we are completely comfortable with, and they will help you in many, many different ways for your food capacity, as it were, on Pesach. Now, here is the list. Beans, meaning this is the list of things that are kitniyot that as Sephardic Jews we can have. Beans, buckwheat, caraway, corn, edamame beans, fennel seeds, fenugreek. Oh, no, not that one. Oh, yeah. Fenugreek, flaxseed, green beans, hemp seeds, lentils, millet, mustard, peas, poppy seeds. Rice is on this list, but we've talked about that. Sesame seeds, soybeans, a lot of soybeans and a tremendous amount of products. Sunflower seeds, teff. I actually don't even know what teff is, but there you go. That is somewhat of the list. Now, to be clear, and this is a general kashrut element, and that is that you have products that we might think is, and this is where it gets complicated for Sephardic Jews. If you go to a kosher store and you find a product that says that this is okay for people with kidneyot, then it's okay because it means all the other elements are okay with those products because they've already checked all the other kosher elements. In America, that's not the case. You see, we might think on our own, and this is where it gets very complicated for us, that, hey, the problem with this particular product is that it has soybean extract or soybean elements or what have you. But the truth is we don't really know, because in America, you don't have to report, or at least you don't have to report on the actual item anything that's less than 2%. You don't have to report anything that's less than 2%. So many times we don't fully know what's in products. So it could be that a certain product needs a kosher for Passover symbol because of other elements we're not seeing in there. You know, there's a famous story with the M&Ms. I'm going to mention this story to you, but before I do, I'm just going to answer somebody who just asked a question. Yes, all of those things. Oh, I see. So first of all, somebody explain what teff is. Thank you. Served in bread and Ethiopian food. Okay. And the other one is Ashkenazim. It says those items cannot be eaten by Ashkenazi. That is correct. If that is your custom in the Ashkenazi community, those would be considered ketniot, and that is the custom of the Ashkenazi Jewry. But let me just take you back to the M&M story. You know, M&Ms were not kosher for a very long time. When I was a kid, I really wanted M&Ms, but they didn't have a kosher symbol. We didn't eat them. And back in those days, you were able to get M&Ms from like England because those had the kosher symbol in England. Now, what was the problem and what changed? So believe it or not, and there's a lot of interesting things in your food. You can actually, I think there's some great documentaries on Netflix and Amazon about what goes into your food. But quick warning, wait till after Passover to see that, because you may lose your appetite for the whole Passover. But for M&Ms in particular, the reason why we couldn't eat them, they weren't kosher, were because if you remember the ad for M&Ms, they would say melts in your mouth, not in your hands. You remember that? Who remembers that? That was a great ad, right? Now, why would it melt in your mouth, not in your hands? Well, they came up with an ingenious thing. They actually use enzymes, ant extract, ants, like little ants, bugs. Because the shell, you ever see an ant shell? It's very shiny, very hard, even though they're so small. They actually use some of that within the M&M shell. And we don't eat bugs as Jewish, that's not kosher, right? So that wasn't on the packaging. It didn't say ants, right, as part of the, right, because it was less than 2%. So it makes it complicated for us as Sephardic Jews, because you may look at a product and think to yourself, well, this tinfoil, tinfoil is an easy one. You say, well, there's a problem with cornstarch because we know there's nothing else that's not food. You're not going to eat tinfoil. And we know that there isn't chametz necessarily in the tinfoil because it's tin foil. But there is an issue whereby you might think that something is not kosher for Passover because it is has kitniyot, but really there's something else that we don't know about that's in there, and that's the big problem over there. So it makes it harder for us because we can't just blanket decide what is kosher, not kosher Passover, and we're somewhat reliant on the kashrut organizations in America that are leaning towards the Ashkenazi customs of kitniyot. So, but there is still a very, very good thing that we do have, which is all of those elements you can make for food. You can have corn, you can have beans, you can have all these types of legumes, you can have edamame beans, you can eat all these things that are not accessible to the Ashkenazi Jews. Now, what do you do if somebody comes over to your house for Pesach that's Ashkenazi? Is that a problem? Well, practically, it's not actually chametz according to the Torah, right? It's really what their custom is. Now, if there is kitniyot in your house or you're having some kitniyot, does that make something that's not kitniyot that you're serving to them problematic? It shouldn't, but that's going to be up to them and their rabbi as to how they do that. But this is a very, very special and important thing that is I'm sorry, I'm getting a few private messages, but I'll answer those in a few minutes. that is a very, very particular svara. Now, I want to take you to a couple of very specific things before we run out of time over here, and then I'm going to open it up to questions very quickly. First of all, there's a lot to cover, but let me try to hit some of the main things. Medicines. Let's talk about that for a second. Okay. Now, even according to Ashkenazi Jews, if a medicine only has kinyot, that's not a problem. They don't have an issue with the kinyot in the medicine. But for everybody, let me give you the overall view. If somebody, God forbid, bar minan, as we say, suffering from potentially life-threatening illness, you can use any medication that's necessary, of course, to save a life, and if it's life-threatening. If somebody is ill but their life is not endangered, you could possibly take required medications. That is something you should talk to your rabbi about. But medication in pill form, and this is very important in general, that's swallowed and not chewed and not drunk, like let's say a liquid or sucking, even if it contains chametz, is permitted without a special certification because it's not considered eating because you're only swallowing it. Now, I know that is an interesting and important statement that has other ramifications for kosher food in general and for, let's say, Yom Kippur, but that we'll talk about at a different time. Liquid medications containing chametz should not be used. Often they're problematic, whether it's Sephardic or Ashkenaz. It's equally something. All prenatal vitamins that are taken as directed by doctors should be used without hesitation for everybody, Sephardic Ashkenaz. The general Sephardic position with, let's say, toiletries and cosmetics is much more lenient than Ashkenaz. There's an entire list, but just as a small one, nail polish, contact lens solution, mascara, lipstick, all these different elements are completely okay. All various types of body soap, shampoo, sticks are okay. Pet food, and I'm just going to jump to this for a moment. Pet food is a problem if it's chametz because pet food, we're not allowed to actually own chametz. And if you're owning chametz, then, or if it's in your environs, then that's a problem. So what we do is that we try our best. We have to get rid of the chametz, but to find the types of foods that work for our animals that are not chametz based, which is different than non-kosher. You see, during the year, you can feed your animals non-kosher food. A lot of animals eat non-kosher food because there's no prohibition to owning non-kosher food. There is a prohibition to owning chametz on Pesach, so it's different than during the year. There's a whole list, which I'm going to mention in a moment, but I just wanted to kind of mention that for a moment. We'll get into some of the specifics later. Let me also mention the Sephardic position for fresh food items, natural food items. For example, meat, chicken, fruits, fresh vegetables, even frozen vegetables. Listen to that carefully. It's better to buy fresh, but even frozen vegetables that are purchased before Passover and canned fruits and vegetables, according to the Sephardic tradition, we don't have an issue with that. If it's natural, 100% natural, you don't need a kosher for Pesach certification on vegetables, fruits, chicken, meats, and even canned and frozen vegetables, if it's 100%, but it has to be 100%. Milk and dairy products, typically we buy it before Pesach because just in case there was some trace of something in there, it will be nullified before Pesach. I'll explain that offline if you like. But those are very, very important ones. Now, there is an entire list of specific food items that we have on the kosher list, which I'm going to mention in a minute. But I just want to jump down very quickly to some specific cleanings of items that people are asking me on the chat here. Is private questions, but I'll cover some of the major ones just for a moment, and then any specific ones we'll leave for specific questions in a moment. But let me just jump through that very quickly. and that is frying pans, which we all have. Sephardic says you could use hagalah, which means the dipping in the boiling water. Ashkenaz, they say you got to use libun, which is the burning. I'm going to just mention them, and to explain them, I'll explain afterwards. But that's separate. Pressure cookers, not cookies. All parts, including plastic, all of that hagalah, which means with the hot water, and not necessarily with burning. Ashkenazi, they typically have issues with that. Knives, Sephardic Jews say it's got to be in a very, very hot boiling cauldron that's over 140 degrees. Plasticware, this is a very important difference. Ashkenazim, the typical Ashkenaz rabbi says you cannot kosher plasticware. Sephardic, we say you could kosher it by dipping it in the boiling hot water. That is one big one. And another big one is drinking glasses or glassware, any type of glassware. Sephardic, the accepted Sephardic opinion is that glass utensils and all their different types, listen carefully, that includes Duraglass, Pyrex, everything. We see those as elements that don't absorb, and therefore nothing happened. No chametz went into them. So all you got to do, you don't have to do any special koshering for Passover for any glassware. Just thoroughly clean them and rinse them, even with cold water, and you're fine. Ashkenazi Jews have a very complex element for glassware where they soak it for 3 days, etc. Ask your local Orthodox Ashkenazi rabbi if that's the case. For plasticware, not as I mentioned, that there's different types, but those have to be in the boiling water. For Sephardim, Ashkenazim, forget about it. Ovens, you do self-cleaning. If it doesn't have a self-cleaning element, you got to clean it with like easy off, leave it unused for 24 hours, and then you put it on the highest level of cooking for a certain amount of time, which I'll explain to those who need. For stovetops and grates, again, clean everything thoroughly. Then we burn it through for a certain amount of time. Enamel glazed stovetops, Sephardic, we just put hot water on top of that. Glass or cordonware stovetops, also the hot water. This is where we also have a different opinion on that. Another big difference between Sephardic and Ashkenaz, two other big differences, and then I'll close it here and then we'll open questions. Sinks, Sephardic, all sinks, even those made of porcelain, may be koshered with boiling water. Ashkenaz is not the case. And dishwashers, Sephardic opinion is that you could clean dishwashers. Again, you got to thoroughly clean it, wait for 24 hours, run a complete cycle with soap, and then make sure there's nothing on those racks to make sure that's all clean. And those are some of the big ones that there's difference between Ashkenaz and Sephardic Jewry over there. Okay, we covered a lot of stuff, but I'm going to open it up to questions if possible right now. And I just want to mention, as I mentioned before, which that's an interesting one. We are going to be doing the songs and the actual live seder. I'm going to do the entire seder on Wednesday night in a week from today, Seked El Yo, where we're going to actually go through all of the customs, all the Sephardic customs, all the tunes, everything you need to know for the seder. We're going to go through the actual seder itself. And on Sunday, so that's next Wednesday, and in between now and then, we have a big sing-along of the classic Sephardic tunes from Passover and the Seder, and that's Sunday as well. So I look forward to seeing everybody on all of that, which would be really great. Now, what we could do is, I'm going to have Ethan, are you still with us over there? Okay, it looks like I'm the host now. So if I'm the full host, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the view so I can see all of you better. And let me gallery view. So if anyone has questions, just kind of raise your hand or put it into the chat, and I will see if we can answer those. Okay, there's some coming through the chat. I'm going to check that in a moment. But if you want to raise your hand, feel free to do that. But let's see. let's see some of the chat questions while we're doing this. Let's see. Okay. We have Dr. Brown sodas are KP, Pepsi is KP because that's sugar. Okay. We are generally not leaning on vitamins. That's true. Now it says last year due to COVID, you said we could put all not kosher for Passover packaged foods in a large storage Tupperware in the garage and seal it off. Yes, this year, because of all the different challenges we have still for many communities with the COVID, in years where I mentioned that the conventional wisdom is to get rid of as much chametz as possible, because of the situation where people are not shopping as much and they're trying to store, it's much better to actually have that on this year. If you need to, you could sell them all the way through. I would say it's fine. Is store-brand uncooked flour okay to have in your house during Passover? If so, it's okay to worry about being tempted to make chametz. Well, that's why we said, and that's why the universal custom has been to get rid of the chametz, because we're worried about those kind of things. But if you seal it up and you really put it away, then that should be okay. Now we have a very, very complex question I see over here about Passover, and that is that somebody said here, tell us the story of setting the bed on fire. Okay, I will tell you. So when I was in, I think, 7th grade, I wanted to be very, very religious, and I wanted to make sure that I'm going to check my entire room by myself and check every nook and cranny and make sure that everything is kosher 100%. There's no chametz anywhere. So I think at the time I used to hide a lot of junk food under my bed. So I figured that's going to be the right place to check. Now, I didn't have anyone then that told me just use a flashlight. So instead, I did what I thought everybody was doing, because we got them in the mail. They would send me in the mail a candle and like a feather and something else to collect stuff. And so what I did was I went under the bed with a candle. Now that wasn't so smart. And the bed went on fire. Yes, it just happened. Now, before I could, I didn't want to tell my parents. I wanted to solutionize this situation right away before the whole house went on fire, bar minan. So what we did was, I happened to have had near my room a fire extinguisher. So I ran out as calm as I could with anybody seeing what's going on. And I got the fire extinguisher and I was able to extinguish the entire bottom of the bed before it took the mattress and the rest of the house. So from then on, I started to use a flashlight, and I think it was a wise move. And I suggest that as well. Now, for anybody that wants to reach me offline, I'll give you my number. You can send me any Passover questions, but that's where I want to leave off on something very important. We have a phenomenal kosher list that's produced in Seattle. I've had some input on that in different years. This year I didn't have time. My daughter got married, so we're very busy when it's being put together, but it's an amazing list. It goes over everything we've talked about tonight and much more. And a tremendous amount of products are listed there. That's kosher Passover, not kosher Passover, for Sephardic, for Ashkenaz. That can be found on the VAD Seattle, VAAD Seattle website for Passover. You can click on there. That's great. If you want a secondary list that I strongly recommend, I recommend the JSOR, which is the Jersey Shore Sephardic Community List, JSOR, that you could find online as well. That is put out by the Syrian Sephardic community in New York and Deal. They do a very, very good job. And sometimes those are talk about different elements that are not talked about in the Seattle list. There's also a list out of Los Angeles, which is a very interesting list that I didn't have a chance to review, so I can't recommend it. But if you have friends in the Sephardic community of Los Angeles that have that list, and maybe another list, but I can absolutely recommend the Seattle one and the New York one. We have a question here. Will it be the same link for Sunday's class? Well, Sunday is going to be a sing-along. I don't know. We sent out flyers for that, and we are going to, we'll send that out again. But let me say, I want to wish everybody here a Chag Kasher Sameach. Should be a kosher and wonderful, spectacular Pesach for everybody. Kon Saludi Beracha, with health and blessing. Mu'adim l'simcha and Chagim l'zmin l'sasson to you and your families. Pesach Halegra to all of you, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully Sunday, and hopefully also on next Wednesday. Now, I see there's an advertisement that my son put out over here. I don't think he realizes a lot of these people are from New York, but for all the Miami people, this is a cleaning. They have a big car cleaning for Passover service. And what he's trying to say is that you don't have to worry about your cars whatsoever. We will come and clean them for you according to all the Ashkenazic and Sephardic authorities. You will not have any chametz in there. So that's up there on that list. But anyways, great to see everybody. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.